Well, we're motoring along here. We got a lot of interest here from the audience. I'm going to put together a couple questions here. We have one from one of our members of parliament from South Surrey, Carrie Lynn Findlay, and she asks how this Indo-Pacific strategy initiative correlates or may work alongside strategic initiatives such as CANSUK. And also things such as our Five Eyes commitments, our Five Eyes relationship. So, what are the convergences? In what ways might there be a nexus between our engagements in the Anglosphere and also our emerging Indo-Pacific strategy? So that's one question. And then we had another question, which is also really interesting, somewhat connected but somewhat different as well, is how can Canada play a bridge with some of our transatlantic security commitments? So obviously we're a founding member of NATO, in addition to the emerging Quad relationship. So is there some of the best practices, whether it's on maritime security or other areas, where we could potentially be a bridge between some of the NATO efforts and those going on in the Indo-Pacific, be it Quad, be it other sort of engagements? And I think if you feel free to be creative in your answers on this, but I think this is interesting because I think NATO traditionally has been obviously viewed as a transatlantic security arrangement, and it is, but is not ignorant to the challenges building up in the Indo-Pacific. And is increasingly looking eastward. So those two questions, I think, if that's not too much, I'd like to pose your way. Could I start with Margaret on this? Sorry, Margaret, you're on mute.
I'm not a security expert, but I certainly know the value of it. And one thing that I've seen in commentary over the last year, 2 years, is that all the security agencies are looking for clarity from Canada on Huawei. And we've stepped back from making an announcement. I think if we had some clarification on that, that would be helpful. Apart from that, I know that we have stellar security agencies, and I have no doubt that they will be engaging with other partners in all of those regions in Canada's interests.
Maybe, Jonathan, I'll jump in here because I think on both questions, I think I can lend some insight. So I think as Canada does engage in terms of the Indo-Pacific, on whatever format it has, it needs to use pre-existing relationships and strengths. So the Five Eyes is an excellent platform to already engage within the region, working with New Zealand and Australia, the United States and the UK. Now, where do they engage? Well, a pretty good example may be in Oceania, thinking about how Canada can lend some of its capabilities in Oceania in terms of thinking about how to provide some public goods to the region. And again, working through the Five Eyes might be a particular area that we can focus on. NATO is an interesting discussion. And I mentioned earlier in NATO that Canada already works with NATO partners globally. We've seen them in Afghanistan and other places. And with European countries, we have the UK just releasing their integrated defense security strategy just this week. France has Indo-Pacific vision. The Germans have one. The Netherlands have one. Perhaps this is an opportunity to propose bilateral or multilateral engagement through the pre-existing NATO model, but the activities that engage in, we locate in the Indo-Pacific. And I think that this is an opportunity for these countries to use that pre-existing institution and working relationship to focus on a geographic area that countries are already starting to recognize as critical to their economic future, but also thinking about the security challenges within the region.
Okay, excellent. Jeff Rohan, did you have any thoughts on this, or did you want to move on to the next question?
I'll pass. Okay.
Okay, well, I have one really interesting one that I want to sort of end off on, but I do have an additional audience question that I'd like to get to before that. But before I get to the audience question, I want to give you a little bit of time to think and put your thinking cap on to have a really creative answer to this. So, if you were the one writing this new Indo-Pacific strategy or this new Indo-Pacific approach, that the Canadian government is working on. If you had one line, so we've talked about a number of different countries who have their own sort of documents out here, and we know sort of what the title looks like there. So what's your one line on how Canada should frame this approach? And it doesn't just have to be Indo-Pacific strategy. Think of something a bit more creative, maybe Indo-Pacific strategy, and then something attached to this. How should Canada try to telegraph this message? Because I think this is a really crucial point. The perceptions in the region, I think, are one of the main things that need to be altered, and altered in a positive direction. So if you were tasked with that, that's your one job, to write the title, to write the forward-looking title for this strategy. What would it be? So I'll give you a little bit of chance to think on that. And then the last question we have, which I think is interesting, it's looking at South Korea, and it says South Korea, like Canada, is outside of the Quad framework, which we've discussed already. Despite that, we have a free trade agreement with South Korea. It's an important partner for us. How should we be looking at engaging South Korea in this region? Is it does South Korea has sort of been a little bit absent in the discussion on Indo-Pacific? It seems rather, whether it's its aversions, China being its #1 trade partner, its national security focus obviously on DPRK. But I think it's important to think about South Korea, because when we're talking about the Indo-Pacific, talking about the security challenges as well in the Indo-Pacific, it's not just China. I think the challenge of North Korea, which we've touched on a little bit, haven't had the chance to focus in great detail on, although, as I hinted, we will have a brief coming out from Ankit Panda very shortly as part of our initiative, who recently wrote a book on Kim Jong-un. North Korea is also a very pressing challenge in this region, and not one that we can overlook. So maybe, Margaret, if you don't mind answering this one first, the role of South Korea and Korean Peninsula issues as we approach an Indo-Pacific strategy.
Thanks very much. Yes, this is really critical. South Korea is right in the key location where we need to be engaging much more proactively. They've proven to be a great ally. We've got a great trade platform that we can work with them on, and they've been an ally in so many ways. So I think it's certainly a country that we should be doing much more with.
Okay, Stephen.
So I think that when we view Canada's engagement with South Korea, I don't think we can only look at it through the bilateral dynamics. I think that we need to really think about what is the relationship between the US, Japan, and South Korea, and how does this affect the broader institutionalization of the Indo-Pacific idea, and how does it affect the security architecture within the region. So in my view, I think Canada needs to work within that kind of framework to try and strengthen relationships, try to find areas of cooperation between those four countries, whether it's focused on the Korean Peninsular issues or thinking about other issues that they can get on the same page of the book. I think that unfortunately, South Korea, I think, is seen as the weak link in an Indo-Pacific vision, because it is very much focused on the peninsula. So if we want to address and include and find a role for South Korea, we really need to address the peninsular challenges, as well as, I think, the challenges with regards to South Korea's economic dependency on China, to allow it to have more strategic autonomy. And that's going to take more than Canada. It's going to take working very closely with the United States and Japan, and perhaps other countries as well.
Okay, excellent thoughts. Jeff, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm totally with Stephen on that one. And I totally agree that I think we need to work with the existing relationships that are there now between the US, Japan, and South Korea. I worry sometimes about South Korea. I wonder if they're drifting into more and more into the China orbit. You know, they're not a member of CPTPP, but they are a member of RCEP. And there is a lot of tension with Japan, which has been exacerbated the last few years. we may be able to play a moderating role to some extent in that, but we have a deep interest in South Korea. We have certainly a very complementary trade relationship. We have security interests in North Korea along with them that potentially would threaten North America. So we have a lot at stake with South Korea. So I would like to find some way that we can deepen our relationship with them and keep them on side.
That's excellent. Rohan, do you have any very quick thoughts on this before moving on to the last point?
Very quickly, Canada's two West Coast ports in Vancouver and Prince Rupert see a lot of cargo to and from South Korea. So watching those maritime routes is very important. And they have two large state-owned shipping lines, SM Line and Hyundai, who are also big players in global supply chain. So again, they're a sensitive country from that perspective as well for Canada.
Indeed, great. Well, that was great, and I thank the audience for all their exciting questions. We weren't able to get to all of them, but we got to quite a number of them. And now, just before I conclude, I would like to get back to that the idea of you being the chief senior policy analyst, and your job is to put the strategy name on. So, putting you all on the spot now to hear how you're going to frame this Indo-Pacific strategy. So, maybe I'll start with Jeff. What would you be your one-liner for everyone?
I'd have to say it's going to be something like Canada is turning west to become a committed Indo-Pacific nation for the long term. I really think that's where our future prosperity is going to be. It's going to be strongly linked with that region. I think we've been far too Eurocentric for a long time. It's time to make that turn. And we also have to demonstrate to the Indo-Pacific that Canada is not just a fair weather friend, but is in it for the long term. And we're going to be there with resources and a long-term commitment. So that would be my statement.
That's great. I think especially the long-term focus and commitment, which I think are themes that we've explored on throughout this webinar. Rohan, what would be your one-liner?
The title would be Consistent, Sustained, and Coordinated, Leverage Canada's Trusted Assets in the Indo-Pacific. That would be the title. I know I'm lifting a lot of the ideas from some of the other panelists, but we do have to show that we're here for the long term. And we do have assets here that can help us do that in a very accelerated way to show that we're serious about it. And I think we're moving in that direction, especially going by this the conversation tone on this webinar.
Well, this is great. I mean, I think the agreement, it works well for me as well. So no worries about lifting, terminology. I think, consistency, sustainability, and coordination, I think are really important elements. Stephen, what's your one-liner?
Canada and the Indo-Pacific, securing opportunity, stability, and prosperity through engagement.
That's excellent. Yeah, I think especially, the two key cornerstones in any country's national interest, security and prosperity, I think makes sense. And a nice title. Margaret.
Yes, I would say Indo-Pacific strategy, deepening a multitude of collaborations with friends and allies.
Excellent. Okay, well, you've given me a lot of food for thought here, and I think you've given a lot of our viewers a lot of food for thought here. This is a real fitting conclusion to our first series of events. The Macdonald-Laurier Institute will continue to put a focus on Canada and the Indo-Pacific through our Canada and the Indo-Pacific initiative. But this is a really nice sort of sum up of some of the discussions that we've had already on security, trade, and governance earlier this year and last year. And will give us a nice segue into some of the discussions that I think we'll be having in the spring and the summer. I think through our initiative, we're going to be focusing a little bit on some very specific issues such as cybersecurity, hopefully energy security, and other elements. So please stay tuned. But a great thanks to our panelists, especially those who stayed up so late at night there in Singapore and Tokyo, and Jeff as well, getting up so early in Victoria. So thank you very much to all, and of course to our audience for tuning in.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Thanks to our participants as well. It's great to talk to you all.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.